What's the movie that gets you the most high on Christmas vibes? Any one of the Grinch movies? Perhaps a little bit of Home Alone? Polar Express, anyone? Anyone at all? For me, my all-time favorite Christmas movie is A Christmas Story. I know, it's extremely overplayed and commodified to the point of insanity, where every house on the block's got a leg lamp in the window. But if you just forget for a moment, all of the leg lamps, all of the you'll shoot your eye out sweaters, what you have is a beautiful and genuine story about an American kid who just wants the best toy ever for Christmas. And I don't know if there's any other Christmas movie that perfectly describes the magical feelings, the manipulative games, the roller coaster of emotions that a child goes through during Christmas. That is why I love this movie. If you carefully look at the beginning, though, you may notice that this story is based on a book, which is titled In God We Trust, All Others Pay in Cash. What is this, a 1975 album title? The narrator is one of my favorite parts of the movie. I just love the way that he would meticulously unfold for you these wacky scenarios that this kid goes through. So I've always said to myself, I gotta read this book sometime. And you know what? Today is the day. But I decided to take it a bit farther. I decided to watch every movie in the Christmas Story franchise. Oh, what is that, like 3-4 movies or something? No. Did you know that A Christmas Story is the third of 9 movies adapted from this book? Apparently, there are 5 movies based on the book and another 4 more based only on A Christmas Story. That is 1 book and 9 movies. Sorry, scratch that. 1 book, 8 movies, and 1 musical. Yeah, you heard me, musical. And I read, I watched, I consumed every one in this franchise so I could tell you about it. Merry Christmas, everybody. I hope you'll join me on this wonderful journey through BB guns, love stories, fireworks, kielbasa, and so much more as we try to find the true meaning of A Christmas Story. But before we get into all that, we first need to start with a little old book called In God We Trust, All Pay in Cash. You hear this guy's voice?
There it is. My house.
There it is. My house. This guy is Gene Shepard, author of the book that this movie is based on. Shepard is widely known as a storyteller and humorist. What the freak is a humorist?
Well, a humorist is an intellectual who uses humor or wit in writing or public speaking, but is not an artist who seeks only to elicit laughter.
Come on, humorist. What are you, being shy? Oh, I'm just a witty humorist, all right? I'm not a comedian or anything. What you gotta understand about the humorist is that they are distinct from comedians. Comedians write jokes for the purpose of generating what we call laughter, which is
the action or sound of laughing.
Their humor is more of a component woven into the fabric of their writing, rather than the main focus. So you might be thinking, where does the humorist exist? If they're not telling jokes on stage, what do? Shepard often spoke on radio as well as writing pieces for magazines, often telling semi-autobiographical stories about his life growing up in Indiana. If there is one thing that is clear, it is that he is a captivating storyteller. He's not doing a quick 20-minute comedy set kind of guy. He's on the radio every day telling you enthralling stories. This man was doing podcasts in the 40s, and by himself too. He would tell stories about the drama of childhood, the wild jungle of adolescence. And he would later go on to gather these stories and publish them in the book titled In God We Trust, All Others Pay in Cash. This book is a sort of anthology gathering a lot of his renowned stories, including his infamous quest for the Red Ryder BB gun, the incredible moment his father won a major award, the plights of being in a marching band, and the time he went fishing for the first time. These stories are told from the perspective of his main character, Ralphie, who is kind of like a loose version of himself. When he's all grown up and after being in the big city as a writer, he returns to home in Indiana to write a piece about what made it so special. He runs into his childhood friend Flick, who now runs the tavern, and they haven't seen each other in years. So Ralph sits down at the bar, Flick pours him a beer, and they slowly start unraveling a back and forth of, oh, remember when's, and oh, how about the time when? Now before this, I was not really familiar with the idea of a humorist, but when you read this book, it becomes abundantly clear. Shepard's stories are written with such wit and precision. His strengths are so evident in the way that he just lavishly describes these events in his childhood, as if they were the most life-defining experiences he's ever had. And when we were that age, it certainly felt like that. It continually surprised me the way he was able to just capture that drama of childhood. When you're a child, everything just seems larger than life. The most minute occurrences feel like a life or death scenario. And Shepard's writings excellently portray that. You gotta read the book to fully understand what I'm talking about, but in order to have the proper context for the film adaptations, I'm gonna read you some excerpts so you can get a little taste of his writing. So we're gonna have a little story time now, okay? Gather around. All right now, children, this excerpt is from a story called The Endless Streetcar Ride into the Night and the Tinfoil Noose. There are about 4 times in a man's life, or a woman's too for that that matter, when unexpectedly from out of the darkness, the blazing carbon lamp, the cosmic searchlight of truth shines full upon them. It is how we react to those moments that forever seals our fate. One crowd simply puts on its sunglasses, lights another cigar, and heads for the nearest plush French restaurant in the jazziest section of town. Sits down, orders a drink, and ignores the whole thing. While we, the doomed, caught in the brilliant glare of illumination, see ourselves inexplicably for what we are, and from that day on skulk in the weeds, hoping no one else will spot us. Those moments happen when we are least able to fend them off. I caught the first one full in the face when I was 14. The 14th summer is a magic one for all kids. You have just slid out of the pupa stage, leaving your old baby skin behind, and have not yet become a grizzled, hardened, tax-paying beetle. At 14, you are made of cellophane. You curl easily, and everyone can see through you. You want to know what this story is about? A blind date. That's right, Flick wants to go on a double date with him, Ralphie, and his girlfriend. So Flick invites his girlfriend's cousin to go with Ralph. It is a wonderful story, might I add. And has a great plot twist at the end, too, that big moment of truth. Here's an excerpt from Harry Gertz and the 47 Crappies. And if you have absolutely no idea what the words I just said were, try to keep up, okay? I don't have time to explain everything to you. Life, when you're a male kid, is what grown-ups are doing. The adult seems to be some kind of secret society that has its own passwords, hand clasps, and countersigns. The thing is to get in, but there is this invisible, impenetrable wall between you and all the great, unimaginably swinging things that they seem to be involved in. Occasionally, mutterings of exotic secrets and incredible pleasures filter through. And so you bang against it, throw rocks at it, try to climb over it, burrow under it, but there it is, impenetrable, enigmatic. The rest of us have to claw our way into life as best we can, never knowing when we'll be admitted. It happens to us in different ways, and once it does, there's no turning back. You want to know what this story is about? Fishing with Dad. You see the way that he spins these stories with just such rich texture? He really knows how to get into the mindset of a child. Everything seems so crucial. Oh, man. All right, one last one. This one comes from Uncle Ben and the Side-Splitting Knee Slapper, or Some Words Are Loaded. Listen to this. Every family has a joke teller, and he is usually bad news. What a beautiful opening line. This is a perfect example of where the humorist and the comedian kind of run parallel a little bit. Where a comedian would deliver this one-liner, Shepard, as the humorist, foreshadows what this whole chapter is about with this hilarious lighthouse beacon of an opening sentence. It then follows, that's right, bad news. But the kind of bad news that sneaks up on you and gets you before you even know what's happened. Joke tellers are not to be confused with storytellers. The difference is not only a matter of technique, but a degree of desperation. Uncle Ben was our family joke teller, and he was so far out on the fringes of the family solar system that nobody ever mentioned him, even in passing. Uncle Ben would show up every third or fourth family affair. He would arrive at about 1/3 bagged, as is the case with most joke tellers. He was not the drinking uncle, because he didn't really drink. He just absorbed the stuff. He didn't really knock it down like Uncle Carl, who would fall down and holler and try to climb back up the coal chute and all that kind of stuff. Uncle Ben just quietly drank. He just had a red nose and sat, and he always looked like, well, have you ever seen a brass lamp? Uncle Ben had a kind of brass lamp look. He'd just sit there and glow. And like most joke tellers, he was indecisively fat. And all he would do at any party was tell jokes. Not funny stories, jokes. And I mean the worst kind. I mean the kind of jokes that should be fumigated before they are allowed in the house. Just absolutely brilliant. I could probably pull up so many more instances of this kind of delightful writing, but at that point, I'd just be reading you the whole book. Every chapter is just jam-packed with wonderfully articulate and engrossing stories just like these. If you are even a decent Christmas story fan, I would highly recommend reading this. This is a great time. It's endearing, it's genuine, and I was absolutely charmed by it. And also the crazy thing is that the stories featured in A Christmas Story are mostly in like the first few chapters of this book. You can tell that those are his heavy hitter stories. But now as we transition into the film adaptations, I really wanted to read to you some of this because it's going to serve as the crucial North Star to these films and even musical in this franchise. So let's graduate into the film adaptations. The year is 1976. Shepard's stories are recognized well enough to warrant an adaptation. Over time, this would snowball into more made-for-TV films, and even a couple big boy releases on the big boy screen. And they aired as follows. 1976, The Phantom of the Open Hearth. 1982, The Great American 4th of July and Other Disasters. 1983, A Christmas Story. 1985, The Star-Crossed Romance of Josephine Koznowski. 1988, Ollie Hop Noodle's Haven to Bliss. All of these here were made for TV films with the exception of A Christmas Story and Ollie Hop Noodle's Haven to Bliss. Let's start with the first adaptation, titled The Phantom of the Open Hearth. In this first installment, Ralphie is in high school. He works as a mail runner for the steel mill, and this fiery steel furnace hangs over him as a reoccurring motif, like the Eye of Sauron. Seriously, like every transition in this movie is just like an intense shot of the Phantom of the Open Hearth just spewing fiery molten flames at you, complete with soap opera organ chord stabs. This is a pretty concisely built movie at just like an hour and 16 minutes, and it features a good handful of stories from the book. The main thrust of the plot is that Ralphie needs to ask out a girl to the prom, and he's desperately hoping to ask out one of the most beautiful girls in school, Daphne Bigelow.
Daphne Bigelow.
But after the anxiety of such a task overwhelms him, he waits too long and instead asks out the girl next door, Wanda Hickey. Ugh. Gross. I'm just kidding. Dude, they seriously like pile in on this poor girl. She's absolutely thrilled that she gets to go to the prom with Ralphie, but he's like, are you freaking kidding me? Wanda Hickey? Just send me into the flames of the open hearth. Why do I have to endure this? Surprisingly, we actually get an early rendition of the leg lamp sequence. Shepard's really pulling in the big guns right off the bat with this movie. I did not expect that. In fact, most of the leg lamp scene plays out exactly as it does in A Christmas Story. Look at this. Even some of the blocking is practically the same. You can tell that Shepard had a very specific vision for this story. In all, this movie was alright. The editing is a little goofy and some of the story elements are a bit dated, but the way that Shepard leads you through these stories is like, a Disneyland theme ride of a bygone era. If you're a super fan of A Christmas Story like I am, you might get a kick out of watching this. And seeing the leg lamp scene as like a prototype is like kind of like a fun bonus feature. I give this one 3 legs out of 5. Next up, we got The Great American 4th of July and Other Disasters, which aired on March 16th, 1982. This entry follows stories that center around Ralph's life as a band geek and the explosive joys of the 4th of July. This one was actually super enjoyable. It's got a very similar vibe to the first one with some of the same actors too. There were a decent amount of stories taken from the book and they were all banger stories. You got this one where Ralph agrees to go on a blind date, the one that I told you about earlier. All along, he's so nervous that she's gonna be like unattractive or like a straight up weirdo, but then he is shocked to see that she's smoking hot. Then after further consideration, he realizes that he's the weirdo on the blind date. It's a wonderful reversal, and just check out this editing.
Great Scott, I've hit the double jackpot.
Excellent. There's another story where the militant and overly serious baton twirler in their marching band like accidentally throws one of his batons up in the electrical wires over the street, blows up the whole town. It's incredible. In another story, the town drunk has this gigantic firework, and the whole town is just in awe of what this thing is capable of, and what unfolds goes down in Holman, Indiana legend. Then we cap it off with one where Ralph's dad, master of Roman candle interpretive dancing, lights himself on fire with one. The pacing of this movie, with just one great story after the next, makes this 1 hour long movie pretty action-packed. I enjoyed this film much more than the previous one, and honestly, I think it holds up pretty well as something nostalgic you can put on during the 4th of July. If you like The Christmas Story, I think you might like this one a lot. Sure, it doesn't have the big budget that A Christmas Story does, but it's very charming in its own small TV movie kind of way. It's got the right amount of dated goofiness, but also a lot of really fun storytelling as well. I give this one 4 Roman candles out of 5. Then, this is a big year for Shepard. We get A Christmas Story, airing just barely over a year later on November 18th, 1983. This is the first adaptation he had with a full-scale movie production backing it, and with a budget of $3.3 million. Upon release, it had mild success opening week, grossing around $2 million in the box office. But as we know, would decades later spawn this gigantic Christmas movie enterprise. But I'm going to circle back and talk about this movie a little bit later. This movie was so uniquely different compared to the others in the franchise, and so for right now, I mainly want to just stick to the TV films. That being said, 2 years later, we get The Star-Crossed Romance of Josephine Koznowski, airing in 1985. This one was okay. You would think that with the success of a major motion picture, the saga of Ralphie would be like way more of a big deal, or it would just kind of like level up in some way. Apparently not. The movie follows the same quality and vibe of the previous as if A Christmas Story never even really happened. And that's fine, but interestingly, it doesn't involve like any stories from the book. Maybe the inspiration comes from some more of his like radio monologues? I don't know. The most notable thing about this one though is that Ralph is horny.
The scent of stuffed cabbage wafted on a soft breeze is dangerously erotic.
Ralph is obsessed with his Polish girl named Josephine Koznowski. Ralph, Flick, and Schwartz are just like obsessed with the idea of asking like a Polish girl out. Lo and behold, the girl next door is Polish. And Ralph is Jones and hard. It's bad. For some reason, the tone of this one is really intense and weird. Just look at this. What is happening? Brother, you gotta cut this out right now or we're gonna lock you up in horny jail, okay? Surprisingly, he asks out Josephine and she agrees. They end up having a cute little high school romance together, and eventually the plot leads her to taking him to a lot of her family. What Ralph didn't realize about the Polish girls, though, is that when they take you to meet their family, they mean business. Ralph gets freaked out and blows out of there. And he gets chased by Josephine's 2 linebacker brothers. Nice. This one was, I don't know. The stories weren't super impressive compared to the previous, and it didn't really amount to much more than just like kind of an average high school romance story. Except for the weirdo vibes. It's got way too much horny energy to it. Are you seeing this? When he's at the Polish function, you know, he beholds all the Polish food and just muses about how erotic it is.
Oh, let me tell you, Polish food has got to be among the world's sexiest. Talk about erotic. Oh, boy.
I rate this one 2 sensual Polish kielbasa out of 5. Then a couple years later, we get Ollie Hop Noodle's Haven of Bliss, dropping in 1988. A differing factor about this one is that it does not follow the made-for-TV format, but rather it was a script that Disney got the rights to and produced it as a direct-to-VHS movie. It's got a nostalgic road trip kind of vibe where the family are trying to escape to their favorite place to vacation to during the summer. Ollie Hop Noodle's Haven of Bliss. You think with a name like that, this is gonna be pretty good, but no, this is not a good movie. This one is not good. It's got a really tedious plot where they're planning to go on the camping trip, but then Ralph gets a job, and then, oh no, if Ralph's got a job, then how is he gonna make it to the camping trip? And then, oh, we lost the dog. Oh, we gotta get the dog back before we go camping. We're not gonna camp without the dog. None of these stories came from the book, and they're pretty devoid of anything worthwhile. It just felt like they were trying to throw a lot of goofy shenanigans at you without much in the way of any like heartfelt or genuine moments that you get from the previous movies. They don't even get on the road till like halfway through the movie. And then of course the road trip is filled with all these crazy obstacles and nonsense. Oh no, there's some shenanigans. And then back to the road again. Oh no, and now there's some other shenanigans. And then we're just back on the road again. Oh my gosh, even more shenanigans that we didn't expect from the first 2 times that we had shenanigans. And then we're just back on the road again. And by the time they finally get to Ollie Hop Noodle's Haven of Paradise, the movie ends like 6 minutes later. Yeah, really not that much here, and it's pretty bland. The only noteworthy thing is that Shepard actually has a cameo in this movie. 1 hop noodle out of 5. Okay, all right, so that's all of film adaptations, taken from either the book or other stories in Shepard's catalog. What comes next are the sequels. But before I get into that circle of hell, I want to circle back to A Christmas Story. Back in 1983, the crowning achievement of all of these adaptations. It's obvious that Shepard had many stories worth portraying on the screen. Regardless of the quality of these adaptations, it's clear how much he cared for the beauty of memoir, recounting these stories in rose-tinted goggles. Even if they aren't the most wild thing you've ever heard, you can't deny that they have a lot of heart to them. And this is where A Christmas Story comes in. This movie gathers up some of Shepard's best stories, the leg lamp, the Major Award, the Ovaltine incident, and wraps them together under the beautiful bow of Christmas. By now, we have seen that Shepard's narration is a key aspect to these adaptations. Not one of these stories that we've talked about so far does not have him narrating like he is our cruise ship captain. We are here to just enjoy the ride, baby. These stories work the best in writing. It's just pure Shepard painting us these wonderful scenes through his prose. So the challenge was to sensibly adapt that into a visual medium. This is where Bob Clark comes into play, the director of A Christmas Story. Also, he happens to be the director of Baby Geniuses, too. This is not really relevant, I just thought I'd mention. Shepard and Clark both worked on the script for this movie, and I think this dynamic is what made A Christmas Story as special as it was. But it sounds like apparently they didn't really get along much. Shepard, being a pretty meticulous guy, was known to like elbow his way on set and try to guide the actors himself. While there might have been a little bit of tension with creative differences between the two, I think it was clear that Clark was the perfect balance and outside perspective that Shepard needed. A key feature in this movie that didn't really appear in any of the others were the dream sequences. This is where the over-the-top melodrama of Shepard's prose crosses over into the visual medium. By making these daydream sequences where Ralph ponders about how his essay about the Red Ryder BB gun is gonna be the best work of fiction you've ever seen. Maybe these sequences can be a little silly now, but I think they really understood Shepard's writing in a way that did it justice on the visual medium. And this leads into my absolute favorite thing about the movie. I believe it perfectly portrays the mindset and imagination of an American child lit ablaze by the wonders and magic magic of Christmas. Every scene is a life and death step towards that fateful judgment day, where he will find out if he is worthy to receive the Red Ryder BB gun turbo action carbine time-telling thing or not. As I get older, I get further and further away from what that era in my life was like. And it's the combination of Shepard's rose-tinted prose and Clark's visual whimsy that reminds me what that was like every time I watch this movie. At the end of the day, this story for me is about the wonders of childhood and the annual apex of that experience, which happens to be around Christmas time. An obvious 5 out of 5 Red Ryder BB guns. Now, I wish I could just leave things there. Just let the image of Ralphie holding his major award while snow falls outside the window fade us out into black. But there is a saying that I have found to be true in moments like these. A saying that, even though it's a cliche, I have found continually to be true. It's a cliche that's been hanging around since 2008, or perhaps far earlier. A universal truth, which is this: you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. You want proof of that? It's in these sequels. When I address these as sequels, what you have to understand is that these are not sequels like the TV films, just another entry in the Ralph saga. No. These are sequels to A Christmas Story in particular. Yes, of course, once you make something that the culture starts to love, that's when the cash-hungry mosquitoes start descending, suck the ever-living life out of it, until the thing you loved becomes nothing more than just an eye roll. And here it is with 4 more films. We got 1994, My Summer Story. 2012, A Christmas Story 2. 2022, A Christmas Story Christmas. And then here's a little bonus one for you for those of you who enjoy partaking in music. 2017, A Christmas Story Live. That's how you know when an IP has been exploited beyond comprehension, is when the musicals start coming out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with My Summer Story, dropping in 1994, a full 11 years after A Christmas Story, which is when all good sequels come out. And surprisingly, it's directed by Bob Clark again. Shepard and Clark both back at it for the sequel. So this should be pretty good, right? Nope. Nope. No. While this movie begins by explicitly referencing A Christmas Story, we get completely different actors, and tone is very different as well. We actually get Kieran Culkin as Ralphie, Roman himself. Ralph gets into some shenanigans with his dad and his never-ending feud with the Bumpuses. He's also in a top battle with his bully at school. Oh, hold on, I could dig on some Beyblades action. And then we get the titular moment when he goes fishing for the first time with his dad and his dad's drunk buddies. And that story is like one of the only 2 that are taken from the book and not executed anywhere near as well. Again, you would think that this movie would be at least all right with Shepard and Clark teaming up again, but it's just so flat. It follows some pretty generic beats and really doesn't go too much far beyond that. I can see that it aims to be like the, summer I became a man, kind of story, but it's pretty weak and often gets distracted by plot points that, 1, either, lean too much on A Christmas Story, or 2, like a lame exaggeration of the beats you get from A Christmas Story. You can't have a lame-ass sequel without using the best parts of the first movie as crutches, while your legs are just flopping around like overboiled noodles. It also became clear to me in this movie that I think Shepard's stories work the best when they have a holiday as the focus, or when they're just moving towards some sort of big event. A Christmas Story worked so well because it was a collection of stories in the solar system circling the sun that is Christmas. And I think the American 4th of July and other disasters worked really well for the same reason. It just seems to give more focus and punch to the stories. In the book, Shepard can get away with just throwing a bunch of random stories at you with no connection because they're really anecdotal. But on the screen, I think they kind of need to be tied together in a cohesive way. And if there isn't something that's really binding the stories together like that, I think it could just end up feeling a little disjointed or just without good structure. Father Parker's subplot of being at war with the Bumpuses is just so over the top and mean-spirited. And Mother Parker gets a subplot taken from a story in the book, and that's pretty good, but it really just doesn't have too much to do with the overall plot. This is not an outright terrible movie, but I don't really think it's worth watching. I give this one 2 sequels out of 5. Oh boy. All right, now we're getting into some really filthy territory now. Next, we got A Christmas Story 2, a direct-to-DVD sequel that dropped in 2012. The sequel obviously ignores anything that My Summer Story did, and instead uses the corpse of A Christmas Story and just jangles it around like a puppet for an hour and a half. This is a bad movie. It's bad. And the worst part is it's not even funny bad. It's just plain bad, which is more bad than if the movie was funny bad, because if it was funny bad, it'd be good. The entire plot of this movie is very loosely based on one story, the one that I read to you earlier, where Ralph scratches his father's car. In this one, however, Ralph is a teenager and he finds his dream car, ends up ruining it, and now he's got to pay back the car dealer before Christmas. Ralph, Flick, and Schwartz get jobs to try to make the money back, but then hijinks ensues and blah, 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 blah. Want to know a couple fun facts about this one? We got Daniel Stern, Christmas movie veteran, playing the old man, and he's...
It's a clinker!
And then as Ralph, we have Braden Lee Masters. Who's that, you ask? I don't know. Lead singer of Wallows? Ever heard of him? Okay. The only other really important thing to note about this movie is this scene where Ralph is just head over heels for this girl in his band class. He stands like right behind her playing the cymbals. When he catches a whiff of her hair, he starts going crazy on those cymbals like he's having an orgasm. It's devastating. This movie gets 1 orgasming cymbal out of 5. And yes, there are 5 of them. All right, next we have A Christmas Story Christmas, which aired just last Christmas season on HBO Max in 2022. It's another 10 years later. Yes, the perfect time for another sequel. Honestly, it was this movie that was kind of the reason why I wanted to make this video in the first place. At first, I thought it was just the original book, A Christmas Story 2, and then this movie. I had no idea how many other movies there were in this franchise. The most notable thing about this one is that you get almost all of the original actors, including Scut Farkus. Gotta take a sidebar here for a sec. Did you know that his name is actually Scut Farkus? Not Scott Farkus, Scut Farkus. Scut? What kind of name is Scut? Get over here, Scut. Unfortunately, though, Darren McGavin, who played the original old man, had passed away at this point. So the movie actually acknowledges this and sets it up where Ralph and his family are going back home to his mother to spend Christmas with her. The plot follows Ralph as he is now kind of like a struggling writer and tries to make this Christmas special for his kids as it was for him growing up. This is actually kind of an interesting way to spin the plot. If the original Christmas Story was about the glories of childhood, this movie is about now being a parent and wanting the same thing for your kids. And I actually think that's a pretty interesting angle to take this movie, considering that Ralph is now an adult. Ralph comes back to his hometown and actually goes to Flick's Tavern, which is a nod to the book. But as you could probably guess, this movie doesn't really draw from many original stories in the book. It's solely a new plot. Ralph and Flick reminisce about Ralph's dad, hearkening him as a sort of bastion of Christmas tidings. And Ralph is inspired to do the same for his kids. The good thing about this movie is that you can at least tell that it's trying. Does it nail the premise? Sure. Is it worth watching as a decades-old follow-up, something I'll put on every new Christmas time? Probably not. Even as a pretty big fan of the original movie, I only really felt inclined to watch this about once, just out of, pure morbid curiosity. Again, it's not bad, but it's just not something I don't think I'd ever really come back to. This movie, to me, does not answer the question that dozens and dozens of other sequels are also not answering. Does this need to exist? And does it build upon the franchise in a meaningful way after this amount of time? And also for this one, I will say that it's still not a bad movie, considering that Shepard had little to nothing to do with this. We've obviously seen how bad it can get without his involvement. It was actually produced and co-written by Peter Bingsley, who plays Ralph. So you can tell that there's at least some amount of passion for making this happen. At the end of the day, I think it just ends up on a pile of other reunion sequels that doesn't really rise above the rest. Again, if you're a really big fan of the original like I am, it might be worth watching. I give this one 3 sequels out of 5. Okay. And now we're here. The 2.5-hour final boss of A Christmas Story. We're faced with A Christmas Story live. I had to save this till the very end. This is its own beast. This is something completely outside of the realm of comprehension. Originally, this was a full-on musical production performed on Broadway in 2012. And then in 2017, they adapted this into a live production filmed for TV. This is an interesting format that I don't think I've seen very often because it's performed live, meaning bloopers are included, but it's also shot on camera, meaning the cameraman can kind of walk in and out of these sets, which gives this an interesting perspective because they can kind of play around with the blocking and staging more. You got something over here, camera moves, and all of a sudden there's like a whole nother scene happening. It also has a pretty decent cast. We got Matthew Broderick coming out of the woodwork, narrating as older Ralphie. We got Maya Rudolph as the mom. We got Chris Diamantopoulos as the old man. We got Ken Jeong. We got Fred frickin' Armisen. What? It's wild. Now, of course, we have to ask ourselves a very important question. Is there a good reason for this story to be made into a musical? And actually, I kind of think there is. Think about it. You have somebody narrating through wacky episodic events. That works really well on stage. And then you have these indulgent, over-the-top daydream sequences. That's what musicals are built on. So yeah, I think this movie actually lends itself well to being adapted into a musical. But does it do a formidable job at taking that into account and making a 2.5-hour musical worthwhile? You know what? I'd say mostly yeah. Any issues that I have with the musical are mainly to do with factors like the writing or how the story elements were adapted, not at all to do with the performances. I have to give credit where credit is due. The staging, the performances, the choreography are actually all really good. The main cast is mostly comprised of children, and they all do a really impressive job at nailing these performances with these often pretty complex dance numbers. Honestly, I don't think there were really any weak performances here. Sure, you get a hiccup here and there, and it mainly has to do with, where Matthew Broderick is starting his lines.
Here it is. Here it is. The house on Cleveland Street, building excitement like some faint, far-off chorus.
But other than that, these performances were really great. The sequence where Ralph is writing his essay about the BB gun is really impressive. There's like this whole fantasy sequence where he's the cowboy savior for his class, and the set breaks down from a classroom into these really fun cowboy scenes and aesthetics. And this one is a great example of how the story is working in favor of a musical format. And of course, you have a whole musical number of the old man winning the major award. Come on, there is no way that this could have been produced without somebody singing a major award. Major award. That is probably the single most thing that kickstarted this whole production to begin with.
It's a major award.
There's this really cool transition where the old man is out dancing on the street with the neighbors, and then we get this close zoom-in shot on his face. You're like, why are we so close? These curtains pull behind him. You can tell there's some sort of like costume change happening, and then when it zooms out and the curtains draw, he's at this really glitzy chorus line stage. And all without skipping a beat. You got these ladies wearing these like lamp-looking dresses. Come on. That's pretty good. Another notable scene is when Ralphie gets his essay back from the teacher. He's all bummed about it, and then Mrs. Shields and the rest of the kids break out into this you'll shoot your eye out number, complete with a jazz band and tap dancing. It was super glitzy and over the top in all the best ways. And again, it's the performances of the children that really stand out here. I also love this part at the end where the Parker family go out to the Chinese restaurant. Ken Jeong is the waiter, by the way. Awesome. And there's this hilarious twist where he pulls out the waiters, and just like in the movie, they're going to sing their Christmas carols in the broken English. But then it turns out they're like this really well-rehearsed and spot-on sextet.
Deck the halls with boughs of holly. Fa la 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 la. 'Tis the season to be jolly. Fa la 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 la.
The old man's like, whoa, I wasn't expecting
that.
And Ken Jeong's like, what were you expecting? That's hilarious. Perfect way to play on our expectations. Yeah, I was pretty surprised at how good the quality of this was. I know the reviews on this are pretty mid to low, and I could understand why. It is quite long, and probably has a few more songs that were shoved in there than there needed to be. I think this musical is at its best with the set designs, the performances, and the moments where the dialogue zigs in comparison to the movie's zag. At worst, sometimes it can follow the script a bit too much, and it just feels like you're filling out a bingo card of all the key moments, with some extra songs thrown in there to pad out time. So yeah, I didn't think it was that bad. It was far better than I was expecting. Sure, it's really indulgent and sugary, but whatever. If you're a big fan of A Christmas Story, I don't know if you need to go out of your way to watch it, but it might be worth watching to see some of these dance numbers, or Fred Armisen as the grumpy elf, or Ken Jeong as both the Christmas tree salesman and the Chinese restaurant waiter, or to see this picture frame fall off the door. I give this 3 duck heads chopped off by Ken Jeong out of 5. After this long and winding journey, it's really sad to see this Christmas movie end up where all popular Christmas movies end up at a certain point. First, it just comes out a movie just trying its best, like Elf or The Santa Claus or Home Alone. And then the minute they start having groundbreaking success, cue the corporate overlords swooping in to take something genuine and exploiting it to the point where it becomes this enterprise, this monster that you cannot escape from. This was just a modest and heartfelt movie, and then in a few decades, it turns into the demon of marketing and consumerism itself. This is why I was kind of afraid to tell you that this was my favorite movie at the beginning of the video. That's like saying We Will Rock You by Queen is your favorite song. Are you freaking kidding me? Anyway, there's not much you can do about it now, but I just hope that in this video, I was able for a moment to just bring you back to what made this story special, bring you back to where it originally came from. After this whole journey, I think a big part of this movie that I didn't even really recognize before was Gene Shepard himself. I didn't even know that it was the author himself that wielded this narration, but something about his narration, he's not reading off of a script, he's reading it from his heart. I mean, probably a script too. After watching all these stories, the one thing I really kept coming back to was how he dignifies the mundane. When you think about it, these stories aren't anything like grand or mind-blowing. It's pretty average stuff. What's this movie about? A kid who wants a toy for Christmas and then gets said toy. That's about where it starts and ends. It's not a kid whose dad becomes Santa Claus because he pushed him off the roof. It's not a kid who's next in line in the lineage to become Santa Claus. It's not even a kid at home alone who uses his incredible wit to outsmart a couple criminals and save Christmas twice. No, this is about a young boy from home in Indiana in the 1940s who wanted a Red Ryder BB gun for Christmas. I think in the digital age where clout, distraction, the Mr. Beastification of things, the pattern of topping one great spectacle after the next, it kind of conditions us to crave grand spectacle. With social media, we're so trained to curate ourselves as more exciting and important and glamorous than we really are. And it really makes me wonder if we're slowly losing our ability to just be okay with the mundane aspects of our lives, even if it's not glamorous. Like I said earlier, Shepard wonderfully portrayed these events in Ralphie's life like they were larger than life. Because as a child, that's how you see it. That's how you experience it. These seemingly small things like going fishing with your dad for the first time, or the antics of being in a marching band, or just looking through the toy store window and beholding one of the best toys you have ever seen. These moments mattered a lot, and Shepard's art was bringing dignity to that, putting words to these seemingly insignificant events that eventually snowball and make us who we are, like putting a frame on a quiet and simple scene. When carefully observed and meticulously told, there is beauty in the mundane if you take the time to tell about it, about some kid in Indiana who wanted one particular toy for Christmas. Hey everyone, special message from Carrie the Snail. Don't worry, it's not an ad read. I'm just here to say from the internet's only snail, Merry Christmas, everyone. I am so thankful for all of you who have stuck around and watched my videos this year, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a future channel update kind of video, which should hopefully be coming soon. But I just wanted to say thank you so much again. You've really made this end of the year special for me, and I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas season. Spend time with family if you can. Call someone you care about, and be careful not to shoot your eye out.